Good morning. So we are doing today Chaf Aleph and Aleph. We are towards the bottom of Chaf and Beis, about 10 lines up from the bottom. But the Gemara says, Amar le Rava le Rav from Bar Papa. All right, the Gemara says, Rava says to Rav from Bar Papa, Lema lan mar mehani mili ma'al yisod havi ovid Rav Huna. Say over some of the good things, say over some of the wonderful things about Rav Huna. He says, I don't remember when he was young anything. B'sivuse, but when he was old, I remember things from when he was old. The avya, because whenever there was a cloudy day, he would come out in his very fancy carriage. Remember, he's the Reish Galusa. He's like, I shouldn't say he was the Reish Galusa. I don't know if technically he was or not, but he was the big rabbi there in Bavel. So they would have a very nice carriage for him. And and he would go check out the entire town where he lived. Remember, the word Saya, Rashi says, is Baydek. We had that word back on Testament base. But the Gemara said that Rav Daniel Bar Katina, so he had a garden called Yom have of the Sire. Every day he would go out and check out his garden. He would check out his plantations, his fields, whatever he had. So he would go out, Rav Huna, and check out the town. And what did he do when he was checking out the town? Why was he going to check out a town on a cloudy day? Because on a cloudy day, there was a lot of wind. What was the issue about having a lot of wind? The issue was that if having a lot of wind, then the walls could fall down. Remember, we just finished a few Gemaras talking about the Barahava special Nisim, right? That he was able to prevent things from falling in. So Rav Huna wanted to make sure that the walls wouldn't fall in when it was a cloudy day. So we go check it out. And whenever walls looked like they were flimsy, he would break it down. In other words, to rebuild it. That imi Lamar, if it was possible for the owner of the property to build it, to pay for it, then he would have him do that. But if it wasn't possible, then he would build it himself. In other words, if he could foist off the cost on the owner of the property and make them rebuild their home or the wall or whatever it was that he had to break down because it was dangerous, so he would make them pay for it. If they couldn't pay for it, he would pay for it out of his own pocket. The Chopanya, that's one story. The Chopanya de Mali Shavata, and every Erev Shabbos, have Meshad Shluchah L'Shuka. He would send his messenger to the market. And every vegetable, like whatever was extra that wasn't purchased, so his shliach would buy it. And he would throw it into the water, into the river. So let him give the vegetables. He has all these extra vegetables that he purchased. Let him give it at least to the poor. So the Gemara says, no, Zimnin the Samcha Daitayu Mizvin. He's afraid that the poor would then be dependent on getting the vegetables from Rav Huna's shliach, and the fear is that they won't ever come purchase themselves because they'll become reliant, and as a result of being reliant and not purchasing, they're going to end up not getting food for Shabbos and sort of be without it. Maybe the fear is that they won't come and purchase, and maybe the what do you call the farmers, the people that are bringing the food, they won't bring as much in the future, and in that case, there won't be enough, to go around. Either way, however it was, he was afraid that the poor would rely on it, and it would end up being a problem in the future. So the Gemara says, "V'lashad behema." So give the vegetables to an animal. So Adam He says you cannot give food for a person to a behema. So it says so maybe not to buy it at all. It says He's afraid that it's going to cause problems in the future because again, maybe over here means that it's going to be a problem in the future because if they're going to not be able to sell all of the produce, they'll bring less in the future and then it will run out earlier. Perhaps that's what it means. Yeah. Another story is Milsa de Susa, when he had some sort of a remedy, when they came out with a new drug. So if he had a drug, he would hang it up he would fill up a pail of this remedy and he would hang it up by his house. The Amr called the boy, anybody who wants this drug should come to my house and take it. V'yikid milsa the shivusa have a gomer. Others say no, it's not a drug that he had, a medicine, but rather it was something about a shade. Rashi says minik shadim. Shifta is some sort of a shadim, a demon. V'yikid milsa the shifta have a gomer. He had some understanding of the way to protect against the shade was to use water. So he had a big pail of water, and he would put this pail of water by his house, and anyone could take it. Amr called it tzarech, called ditzrich, leisev leil, deloy the stock. Anyone can come and use this water, wash their hands or whatever. They shouldn't be in danger of this shade. You have a karach rifta when he would have a meal. Have a pasach lebave. He would open his doors of his house. V'omer kol man ditzrich leisev leil. Right, like we say on Pesach, whoever needs the food should come eat. Amar Rav says about himself, Kulu matzina mekhainmin levar mehad, lo matzina mabin. Rav says, I could have done all of these things, except I don't think I could have opened up all the doors to my house and invite anybody in. We turn out to Chafaf Manalef, Mishum de Nefishi b'nei Chel de Mechayza. Because there were too many soldiers in Mechayza, because too many people that would, take advantage of this largesse, of this openness. Rashi says it's b'nei aniyim, it's poor people that would come, but the simple translation of b'nei Chela is army, like the many soldiers. Maybe the soldiers would come. All right, now let's go back to talk a little bit about these stories about Rav is asking Rav from Bar Papa, tell me stories, tell me amazing things about Rav Huna. So the first thing I want to focus on in this Gemara is the fact that what was the response of Rav from Bar Papa to Rava? He said, when he was young, I don't remember. When he was old, I remember. And then he gives you a few stories of when he was an older person. So on one level of understanding this Gemara, what does it mean beyond Kusa Loy Dachirna? When he was young, I don't remember. It could be that when he was young, Rav Bar Papa has no recollection of it because maybe he was also young. Maybe he was not of an age where he could recall. But I like to think that this is maybe a raya to a big topic that has come up over the last 50 years. And this relates to the topic of Gedalim biographies and whether or not they are appropriate for kids or not appropriate for kids. You may or may not know that in the early 2000s, there was a big fight about a book called The Making of a Gadol by Nosson Kamenetsky. He wrote a massive volume, 2 volumes about his father, his grandparents, the world of Lita, and it was banned. It was banned. I'm not so interested in the history, but I am interested in the 2 days that were enunciated in the last 50 years. One was Rav Huna. Rav Huna in the Igros Muchtavim in letter Kuf Chav Ches writes very famously that, of course, we need to have appropriate biographies that are historically accurate about Gedalim. And the reason for that is because one is difficult to learn from Sheker, sure. It's also not appropriate to think that inspiration comes from Sheker. Are you more inspired by hearing that the Gadol knew Shas when he was, 7, and he never looked at an inappropriate thing in his whole life? He never had any taivas. I got into a debate this Friday night with people at my table in relation to this idea that Rambam writes in the Shemana Prakim about different levels of a person who has natias towards murder, right? If somebody has a natia towards murder, and he's overcoming that. Somebody has a natia towards kfira. Somebody has a natia toward, at what stage is a natia a determinant in terms of the good or the bad of a person? What happens if somebody has no natias at all? Remember, I said over in Brachas Lamed Machlekes, sort of with simple reading of Pshat that the Marsha has in terms of understanding of Baal Tshuva. According to the Marsha, the Gemara there has the Machlekes, who's greater, the Tzaddik or the Baal Tshuva? The Baal Tshuva greater or the Tzaddik greater? What are the Marsha, right? The Baal Tshuva is somebody who never sinned. He just had a Purim sin. And I brought that down later to the Tanya The Taanit understanding of a Beinoni is that a Beinoni is somebody who has never sinned, but he has taivas to sin. And I said this is very, very difficult to understand in terms of pshat. In fact, can't be understood in terms of pshat. I'm reading many, many chazal that would disagree with it. And instead, I brought down the Gemara in Sukkot and Beis, Gemara Shabbos, Kedushin Pei Aleph. They have many, many times contrary versions of chazal about Gedalim who had very, very real appreciation of taivas. I'm not talking about taivas of kfir or flat, that's not normal taivas. Right? Because Kol HaGadol Mechaver Yitzer Gadol Mimenu was understood in a very real way. And the more there brings down many stories there at the end of Kedushin. And so that is on the one side. Rav Hutner, and by the way, when he passed away, there was no Gedel story published by Art Scroll or anyone else. In fact, the only time that they ever published anything about Rav Hutner was the Zechrinus of his daughter, Maria Hutner David, or David, when she passed away. They translated that from Hebrew into English, but only once she passed away. I don't know the politics in Chaim Blunt, but I do know that that definitely was significant. And if you read it, you'll see it is not a Gedalim story. It talks about Rav Hutner and his diary, Rav Hutner and his passion to become a great gadol, Rav Hutner and his awareness of his standing and his attempt to build it. It is, even in the English, very condensed version, and also certainly airbrushed version. It's not at all similar to other Gedalim stories. And then you have on the other side of Shimon Schwab, in the selected writings, writes very clearly that the Gedalim stories are not meant to be history. For history, read history books. Gedalim stories are meant for inspiration. And for inspiration, you write about them and how wonderful they were. Do you need to know their politics? You need to know their fights? How is that inspiring? And it's clear to me that Elu ve'elu can be said about this machlekes as well. That is, depends on the age. First of all, the biggest raya that as an absolute, of course, if Shimon Schwab is not correct, if it's an absolute that you're not going to write about the failings, the moral failings, the problems, if you're not going to write about that, is fundamentally, for sure, 100% incorrect. Why? Because you have literally a Tanakh that's full of all the failings of the Jewish people. This was pointed out by the Kuzari. But it's more than that. You have a whole Shas that's full of failings of various rabbis. And so it is 100% that you can't understand Shimon Schwab as being forever. But you're going to teach a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, that this gadol did that wrong and this gadol did that wrong? Of course not. When they're young, you teach them everything is chant and kugel and perfection. Everyone got along and everything was rosy. It was always perfect. They always knew Shas and they were learning. Of course, that's how you teach kids. We don't talk about the problems of Yaakov Avinu and did he have. For some people, they remain kids throughout their life and they never get to the level they can understand things in a real way. That is unfortunate. But there is a place to make everything look rosy, to make everything look lily white, whitewash everything. There is a place for that, 100% within Chazal, all the way down till today. However, I'm not sure if the age is 13, somebody's more precocious, of the age is 20. But if at the age of 50 or 60 or 70, you still understand everything in the same unvarnished, perfectly clean, lily white view, and you see nothing of the challenges, of the travails, of the issues that from the others down to the Gedalim of yesteryear till today faced, and he's totally missed the boat about what it means to fight in life to become great. Everyone had to fight. It's Ron Cullen used to love to quote a line that came from Thomas Edison that it's 1% genius, but 99% perspiration. Of course, he, in the making of a Gadol, caused many rabbis in Lakewood to be very, very upset because of what the stories that he said about Ron Cutler, that only enhances his genius. For those at our age who have a much more sophisticated understanding of the world, the fact that Ron Cutler read a novel doesn't diminish Ron Cutler in our eyes. It makes, wow, he read Russian novels, he wrote his romantic letters, and he still was a Ron Cutler. That is inspiration, but don't tell it to a 13-year-old. Because that will inspire him to read novels. Maybe then I'll become a Ron Cutler. That's not how it worked. It's despite. All right, so perhaps then, if that all this background is correct, then let's read the Gemara. When Rav is asking Rav Mar Papa, let's say over something that was amazing about Rav Huna, So why didn't he not just respond and say, "Look, let me tell you some stories"? Why does he open up with the introduction? I don't remember anything from when he was young. But I remember from when he was old and he starts listing off stories. My argument to you is that he was unnecessary words. The reason the Gemara includes the words is because that's the inspiration. Tell me over something inspirational about Rav Huna. So he's responding. And the response is, I don't remember anything when he was young. That's the inspiration. He still became Rav Huna. That, I believe, would be then an unbelievable raya to Rav Hutner's understanding. That is, when people are young, there's a line, a story. I really have to move on, but I'll just tell you this is a great story. I think it was Rabbi Neuberger. It was Rabbi Neuberger, chef of one of the Rabbi Neubergers from when they started Israel. So Rabbi Chanan came to America, and he was in America for a year or something like this. A lot of stories, not for the moment. He didn't want to take a job in Yeshiva University. A whole Ma'aseh Shimon Shkab did. I can't get into it now, but he came to Israel. He visited Israel, and the whole place, whatever the yeshiva was in the 1930s. I don't know what it was, but it was not huge. Israel started out in Connecticut, but eventually ended up in Baltimore. So they came out to greet him. The whole place was dancing. And Neuberger, named Tony Neuberger, was beside himself. Like, I was with him at Cheder. It was nothing special. Now he's like the Gadol. That's what it means. That's the inspiration, because they worked. It's 99% perspiration, 1% of genius. All right, nothing more. So now we had that. That was number one story. The second thing I wanted to focus on in this Gemara was the idea that he was throwing off the vegetables into the river. He's throwing off the vegetables into the river. Why throwing vegetables into the river? Use the vegetables. Okay, I can't give it to the behemoths. I can't. But what about Baltashkas? Why is he not worried about Baltashkas? Throwing out all the vegetables into the river? Yes, you're afraid that if you give it to the poor, they're going to come be too reliant on it, whatever. Okay, but why? How are you not worried about Baltashkas? So in the law of Baltashkas, we understand that the law of Baltashkas is very specific. That it has to be no toyelas. If there's a toyelas, it's not Baltashkas. All right, Baltashkas is not just the pasuk there in the form of Loisashka says Eita. It's not just about trees. It's about anything. Baltashkas applies everywhere. Now, maybe there's no Malchus Midarais, maybe so Malchus Midas, fine, whatever, but it includes wasting anything. So, but if it's Toyelas, it's not Baltashkas. Would we have a raya from this from our Gemaras and Brachas? We had Gemaras and Brachas, and everybody remembers the Gemara and Brachas tells us on, I think it was Lamed Aleph over there, right? Lamed Aleph at the top. The Gemara told us there in the beginning of the fifth parak that you had Ma'aseh there, Mar Braid, Ravina, Ravashi. They were making simchas for their kid, and the Chazinu Rabban, the Kabadchi Tuva, they saw the rabbis having too much fun, so they were angry that the rabbis were having too much fun at their own family simchas. So they went and broke some very fancy kais. This ends up, Taisa says, becomes the source for breaking the cup at the chuppah. We think as Lud Yerushalayim, whatever, but the actual source of it, how it started, was so you shouldn't get too excited. Don't forget. Like at the end of the day, like don't lose yourself. So why wasn't it a problem about Tashas? Over there was Casa de Mukha. It was very expensive, right? The Gemara says it was worth 400 zuz. It was very expensive. It's not about Tashas. It was Tayelas. So clearly over here, he felt it was a Tayelas enough that it was not a situation about Tashas. The last thing I'll just mention is that we had also in the Gemara and the Brachas that of saying Kol man open the doors and letting everybody in, as the Gemara praised people who had long meals, where they gave enough time for people who were poor to be able to come to eat. So that's in a sort of similar vein to what we have over here. Anyhow, the Gemara concluded that Rava said, I could do all of these things. I could do all of these things that Rav Huna did. He says, I could do all these things. Again, where's Rava coming from to say something like this? Because everybody's supposed to say, Masai, Yigia, my side, my side, my side. Everybody's supposed to say about himself, like, This is what the previous generations did. How can I get there? How can I make my life be more like theirs? How can I reach those supernal levels of spirituality that they attained? So Rava himself was saying, "Oh, I could do this. I could do that. Yeah, yeah." Maybe he was attempting to include some of that, but he says, "I cannot have open door policy in my house. That's not going to work." As we saw the more in the beginning of Aleph, that either because there's going to be too many soldiers, or maybe it was going to be too many aniyim, whatever it is, he was not willing to go that far. Okay, now today we have an unbelievable, exciting Gemara. Top of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. The Gemara we mentioned it in the past. Ilfa of Rabbi Yochanan Havigarsi Be'oraisa. They were learning. Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan. Notice who comes first in the story. Ilfa is mentioned first. Says the Gemara, Dechikulu Milsa Tuva. They were very poor. Amri Nekim v'Nezel v'Navid Isker v'Nekayim v'Nafshin Efes Kiloye b'Cha Evyon. So they said, maybe we should go work. And if we go work, we're going to be Mekayim. The Pasuk says, Efes Kiloye b'Cha Evyon. You're not going to have any poor people by the Jews. So if we go work, we won't be poor with Mekayim this Pasuk. Azlu Oisve Tute Guderia, right? You want to know why this Gemara is coming up, why this Gemara being brought down. So obviously it's connected because again, you got to shake your wall. So these goes and they're sitting underneath a shaky wall. Havikakrachi rifta, they were eating. Asi trei malachi ashars, two malachim. Now, obviously, what does it mean? Two malachim come. A person is normally surrounded by two malachim. If a person is normally surrounded by two malachim, why aren't there four malachim? Not 100% clear. All right, either way. Shame Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chad L'Chavei Nishti Alayo Hai Gudav V'Nektalinu. So Rabbi Yochanan heard that one of the malachim said to the friend, "Let's go throw this wall down and kill these guys." Because they're leaving the world of Olam Haba and focusing on this world, meaning they're focusing not on their learning, but they want focusing on their material needs. They're poor, so they want to go work. So he says, "No, don't do this." The other malach says to the first, "Why? Because there's one guy here who's going to be mamish unbelievable. Right? There's one guy here who's going to be mamish unbelievable." Rabbi Yochanan shama, Ilfa lo shama. Rabbi Yochanan heard, and Ilfa didn't hear. Rabbi Yochanan Ilfa shama mar midi. So Rabbi Yochanan asked Ilfa, "Did you hear anything?" He said no. Says Rabbi Yochanan, Amar midi shama ana ve'Ilfa lo shama. Shema min aladi kaim lo shaita. Said Rabbi Yochanan, it must be that if these malachim are talking about that, don't break the wall down on these guys. Why? Because one of them is going to be kaim lo shaita. One of them is going to be very special. Then it must be they're talking about me. So Rabbi Yochanan said, "You know what? I'm going to go be mekayim this in myself. That what? If I'm going to go work, I'm going to be mekayim. There's no poor people. I'm going to go back to learn. What am I going to be mekayim? Another pasuk. That was the pasuk. There will never be no poor people. There will always be poor people." He says, "I'm going to go back to learn. I'm going to be poor." Rabbi Yochanan decides to go back to learn, and Ilfa decides to go to work. By the time Ilfa comes back from working, Rabbi Yochanan is not a Rosh Yeshiva. Amru loy. They said to him, this is an unbelievable line, the Yentas, what the Yentas say. So the Yentas, they said to, Yentas doesn't have to be woman, just to be clear. We're talking here about presumably Yentas in the base medrash, Yentas in town. They said to Ilfa, I'm sorry, Asiv Mar, Vigaris will have a Malach Mar. If you had stayed in learning, Rabbi Yochanan wanted to become Rosh Yeshiva. Why? Because remember what I said about who's mentioned first in this story? Ilfa's mentioned first. Rashi points out, Asiv Mar Vigaris, the Ilfa have become Mitzvah Rabbi Yochanan. Ilfa was a bigger Talmid Chacham than Rabbi Yochanan. Now, Rabbi Yochanan himself is rich because now he's the Rosh Yeshiva. They said, you could have been rich too. You could have survived. You could have thrived. You could have had everything because you were greater than him in learning. But you didn't. You went to work. Now, the fact that the Yentas talk can't stop the Yentas. This is what they are. But Ilfa reacted. What did Ilfa do? Azal told Nashib Asko this finta. He went and tied himself to the mast of a ship. Omar, Iko Dishol Libim Asnisa Rabchiva Raboshev Le Peshtina Levim Asnisa Nafilm Aska the Sfinta Tavana. Does anybody should ask me from the Brisa? Anybody should ask me from one of the things that was taught by Rav Chia, Rav Shia? Ask me a shaila from there, and I'll show you how I find that in the Mishnah. In other words, they didn't make anything up in the Brises. Whatever they said, I can find that in the Mishnah. And if I can't, then I'll jump off this mast, and you know what happens when you jump off a mast that's 100 feet high, you die. So Asahu Saba, this line of the Gemara blows me away. I've never been able to answer it. Asahu Saba, not a young yanta, an old Saba. Usually, a Saba is usually somebody who's, a senior person, maybe even a senior Tamachacham. Asahu Saba Tonalei. So an old person said, okay, let's try this. Let's try this. You know what the consequences are if he doesn't get it right? Yes, says the Gemara, so what? So this Saba decided to test him. Ha'imar tenu shekel livnei b'Shabbos, right? Talking about a person who's dying, right? You listen to what he's going to say in terms of what he wants. His last will and testament. He's making decisions about his life. He says tenu shekel livnei b'Shabbos. Give 1 shekel, I mean whatever. Give some amount of money, small amount of money, to my sons every week. They ain't ruin less than sell, and really they're right for more. Meaning they could use more money than the amount he's allotting to them. So do you give them only a shekel, or do you give them the sell? Do you give them more money? So the halacha is nice and sell. You give them, if he says tenu, give them, then give them even a seller. Despite the fact that he said shekel, you give him a seller. V'imamar al titanu, if elo shekel, if he says do not give them anything except for a shekel, then ain't nice than elo shekel. Then you only give them a shekel. Right, so it's a question of how specific he is in his language. If he says tanu, you can give them even more than a shekel. But if he says al titanu, then you only give them a shekel. Says the Gemara, im amar mesu. If this dying person says mesu yarsh machem tachtem. If this person also says that if these sons of mine pass away, and other people should yarshin after them, then ben shamar tenu, ben shamar al titanu, whether he said tenu or al titanu, a nice shekel, then you only give a shekel. Why? Because clearly he's contemplating a situation where there could be other people who are being yerishim that are not his sons, and he wants to make sure that they're going to be allocated a sufficient amount of money, and therefore he's saying shekel, only a shekel. That's why he's being so specific. So that was the question to Ilfa. Can you show us a Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi also prepare where he says the same thing, that you have to listen to what this guy is saying on his deathbed. So Amalei Hamani Rabbi, he says, no, this is the sheet of Rameir. This is the kind of Rameis. Boom. Right? So he found a source in a Mishnah to explain the Brisa, and he didn't have to die, he didn't have to jump off the mast of the ship. There's a lot to say here. I mean, tons. So let's start out with one point. I don't know how much time we don't have a lot of time. So let's try to get a couple of quick points in. One, the Gemara tells us in Erevin Nun Hey that Rabbi Yochanan says this line becomes much more pregnant now that we see this Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan says he dashes from the pasuk in Devarim, Loi b'shamayim, right? The Torah is not in heaven. Loi timtza b'gasei ruach. You can't find the Torah by the egotistical people. V'loi me'ever layami. You can't find the Torah over the sea. The Torah is right here, right? It's mamash here. Loi me'ever layami ki karai ve'elecha davar ma'id. Says the Gemara over there. What does it mean? Loi b'shamayim? Loi timatze loi b'saracharonim v'loi b'tagarim. You can't find it by the merchants who go travel around the world. They go on the boats. They will not find Torah there. What did Ilfa do? Ilfa went on the boats. He went traveling. That's the mast of the ship that he comes back. Going to go hang himself by the mast of the ship. And he's showing that he does have Torah. Rabbi Yochanan is darshaning a pasuk lo b'shmei v'lo me'er v'layam. It's not found by the Tagarim and Sacharon who have to go me'er v'layam. I'm not going to say more other than to say that seems like something that has very, very right in terms of what Rabbi Yochanan thought of Ilfa's choices. But it sounds like this Gemara is a proof against Rabbi Yochanan. That is, Rabbi Yochanan saying the Gemara in Eruvin and Hey, what can be read then as a shita against Ilfa. Lo b'shamayim lo meir v'layam is against Ilfa. You're not going to find Torah at Tagam Sachan. And yet you have this Gemara that stands athwart. This Gemara is telling us a Ma'aser where Ilfa went to work. And the conclusion of the story, this story is not aggrandizing Rabbi Yochanan. This story is aggrandizing Ilfa. He came back, and he still had it. He was still sharp in his learning. He still was able to answer shilas. Ilfa was very upset that this Saba thought that he gave it all up by going to work. The two malachim in this story seem to be suggesting that anyone who's going to work, let's drop the wall on them. And Ilfa is showing no. I went to work, and I kept my learning. This Gemara is used by all the rabbis who went to work, which used to be normal. The Rambam in Avos, Perek Dal Mishnah, Kardim Lachbar, the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah, the Rambam in Hilchos Manasaniyim. This, it was Pashat. But for the Tash Bates and Chelik Aleph, Sim Kufman Beis, all the way to Kufman Tes, all the 7 shuvas that he goes against the Rambam, the Kesef Mishnah there, and the Talmud Torah, and all those that have disagreed with the Rambam, and the modern day people who think that the Rambam retracted because of the end of Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel, the last halacha, which is totally wrong for 3 reasons that I can't get into now. But this way of the Rambam or the way of the Tanaim and the Amoraim, they all worked, is not something that we find today. And so the few people that you see who did go to work and became major rabbis, this Gemara was always one they came back to. Some famous examples of Chai Adam, who writes in the Zakdama that don't not read my works because I'm a merchant who goes to Leipzig for the fair. Just read my work. Margolius, the Margolius Hayam. Also, don't think that just because I am engaged in business, I'm somehow tainted and my Torah is not worthwhile to still learn. This Gemara is their right. That's number 1. Number 2, the line of the Gemara here is a very fascinating line. The Gemara says that they hear the 2 malachim talking, and one says to the other, let's knock them up. Let's break down the wall. Why? Because Menichem Chaya Olam Va'iskim B'Chayesha. Menichem Olam Va'iskim B'Chayesha is an unbelievable line. It's a very pregnant line. Why? Because we find it 2 places in Masechah Shabbos. One on Daf Yud, and one on Daf Yud Aleph. In the Gemara in Daf Yud, the Gemara says over there the Rav is saying this line because he sees somebody learning, he sees somebody davening too long. And he's like, wow, you're davening so long. What's very fascinating is how this connects to the Gemara Brachas Lamed Hey, where you see that Rav over there is telling the students, I'm begging you, please, I don't want to see you during the months of the planting and the harvesting, because then you're going to be too poor. You're never going to be able to focus on your learning. Go work. So my mind is like, I don't have a good answer to explain Rav's opinion in more Shabbos. However, Rav is criticizing somebody who's davening too long because he says, and then turn the page in Shabbos, go to Daf Yud Aleph, in the bottom there, you'll see that Rabbi Yochanan is talking there about the ability to not even daven because he doesn't learn all the time. So Rabbi Yochanan says that's for Rashi Shir Mayachai. But for us, he's Tarasam Nasam. But for us as a Yochanan, we have to daven. There's no excuse for us not to daven. And remember the Bar and Brachas that we had. Rabbi Yochanan says, right, Halavai, Sheispal Kol Hayom Kulei. Halavai, we should be able to be davening all day long. Like the Chassidim Rishon, we daven 9 days. Halavai, we should be able to daven all day. That's a very interesting aspect of tefillah. That's not tefillah for being Isaac be'chayom. That's not tefillah to be able to have parnasa. That's tefillah that's communing with the Rebbeinu Shalom. I can't explain more. But look at the Gemara there on Shabbos Lam Gimel, and the Gemara there says, Reb Shimon Yochai himself says, when they came out of the cave the first time, remember, they have to go back in a second time to cool down. But the first time they came out of the cave, after 12 years, they would burn up people, like zap them, right? Whoever they saw that was working. Why? Because what did they say when they saw people working? They said, why are they not learning? How could they be working? That connects very well to Reb Shimon Yochai that we see in Brachas Lamed Hey, where he doesn't understand. Anybody, V'hayim Shemai for him is a curse, not a blessing, not ideal. What's very fascinating is, of course, that in that very Gemara there in Shabbos, we find that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai every single day would stay up to his neck in the dirt because they didn't want to get their clothes ruined, and they put the clothes on every day to what? To daven. Every day they would come out of the ground in order to be able to daven. They would put on their clothes, which meant that they themselves interrupted their learning to be able to daven. So Rabbi Yochanan back on Shabbos at Aleph is saying that, oh, you can't not daven, you have to daven. Only Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he doesn't have to daven because he, mamish, Taras and nothing, he learns all day. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself, daven. So we're talking about davening. How could davening be a chayashah? Only if davening is for parnas asking. But if davening is communing with your Rebbeinu Shalom, and even Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that's not a hefsek. That's part and parcel of what Torah is for. All right, we have to do one more story, quick. So the Gemara. Yeah, Amar Olav Nacham Ish Gamzu. Gemara says about Nacham Ish Gamzu. Shehaya Suma Mishneh Enav. He was blind. Gila Mishneh Yadav. He was missing hands. Kita Mishneh Ragli. He had no feet. V'chol Guvei Malishchin. V'haya Mutov Beis Ru'uya. Again, what's the connection? A very shaky house. It could fall down. Ragli Mitasim Nacham B'Safon Shalmayim Kadesh Lo Yalu Nimon. And his bed posts, he had the four corners of his bed were mamish in pails of water so that the bug shouldn't come. One time it happened that where his house is in this very shaky. So his students, they wanted to come along and help him, take him out of the house because the house is going to fall down. But they're going to take out. So he says to them, listen, the way you got to do it is not to take out the kalim and then take me out. I'm sorry, to take out the me and then the kalim. First take out the kalim and then take me out. I'm 100% that the house is going to fall. As long as I'm here, it won't. So take me out first. Take the kalim out first, then take me out, and then we won't lose all that. This again reminds us of Rabbi Ada Barava and shaky walls, shaky houses, etc. They took him out after they took out all the kalim and the house fell down. You're such an unbelievable person. Why did this happen to you? I managed to this to myself. I was once going on the road to my father. I had three donkeys with me. I was full of unbelievable stuff. It was a poor guy. I'm hungry. I need something. He says, I will unload my donkey. I'm going to give you food. It was too slow and he died. I fell on his face. I didn't have mercy enough on you. What do you mean? I did. It wasn't fast enough. Right? So my eyes should be blinded. Right, my right, my hand should come off because I didn't help you. It wasn't enough. I should have everywhere. He said, never that I see you in such a terrible state. Never, if you wouldn't have seen me in such a state. The Chol Milson have a salko Amar Gamzu Lateva. Everything that would happen to him, he would always say Gamzu Lateva. I'll have to continue tomorrow.